stop, you know, and I'd still be playing, and I had to. It was such a pain, but I almost developed like a mind of its own in my foot because I had to keep, no matter what I was doing, I had to keep stomping on that drum to keep it going. And I got to where it wouldn't distract me, but this is like so much of a luxury to have one that just repeats, so I don't have to keep stomping on it. For years, like no matter what, I had to keep doing the drum with my foot. God. Srinivas, I believe, let's see, Henry Kaiser, I believe, gave me an album first of his about 9 years ago or something, and it was when one made when he was very young, and Willjay played the gatam on it, and it was called Charming Ragas. And from the first moment I heard that, I was like, wow, you know, I couldn't believe that sound, because on a guitar there's kind of two ways to solve the problem of ornamentation. You can bend a note or you can slide a note. And I hadn't, the only person I had heard Westerner play with other Indian musicians back a long time ago was John McLaughlin, who played with Viku and El Shankar and them and Shakti. And El Shankar is mine. I love El Shankar. From the first moment I heard him, I've been hooked forever. I just like, oh gosh, it's amazing, you know. But then John McLaughlin, he seemed to solve the problem by a type of bending notes. And okay, but that never quite satisfied me. And what Srinivas provided for me was the key to see that, oh, I see now. I could see when I heard Srinivas, I could understand that, yes, that's how it can be done. Because with the sliding. Now the only problem is a mandolin has a very small neck, so you don't have to do very drastic movements. But a guitar is a lot longer scale, so and so you have to do much bigger movements, you know. And then the bass is a longer scale, it's even more, so it gets even a little bit harder. So quite a bit harder. So, but yeah, Srinivas had the effect on me of showing me a way that on the guitar. Ornamentation similar to vocal music, because everything comes from vocal music. It's always, in listening to Indian music, my favorite has always been the vocal music, always. I love the great instrumentalists, but vocal music's my favorite. And so in order to try to get that ornamentation, Srinivas inspired me and showed me a way that it could be done. You know, that I realized then that I believe that sliding is the way that sounds better and works better on the guitar than trying to bend. Now the other answer is to use a slide. So many Hindustani guitarists will use a guitar and maybe turn it this way and have the action high and use a slide, like Vishnu Mohan Bhatt or Brij Bhushan Kabra. And that's a good answer too. A slide is a good answer. A fretless guitar is a pretty good answer. But I think that this bending business, that's not a very good answer. For some reason it works very well for kind of blues type of ornamentation and blues feeling, but it doesn't work real well for the types of ornamentation that Indian singers and other singers use, even in the West, singers like Stevie Wonder or because in the vocal tradition of gospel music in America, there's also a type of singing that has many ornaments in it that's very similar to Indian type of ornamentation, and also like Qawwali music has a similar ornamentation and everything. But in the West, actually, in the blues, if you go back to the original Delta blues people, which in the 1920s, that they evolved their music from what started out as field hollers, what they called field hollers, which was the slaves in the slavery days in America. they would sing while they're working in the fields. And then eventually that evolved into what was called, what became the blues. And the people that kind of invented that form in America, or played that way, expressed themselves in that manner in the 1920s. The wonderful thing about that is it's using just intonation, like Indian music, because it's perfectly in tune. And they use ornaments that are very similar. So there's a point which two things that weren't really exposed to each other happen to be very similar in some ways. Where I'm from in Memphis, Tennessee, that's like the area where blues, just 50 miles below where I live was the Delta, the Mississippi Delta, where all of these blues people came from. And then essentially what those guys did with Blind Willie Johnson and Robert Johnson and Charlie Patton, and then in Texas with Lightning Hopkins, and in Louisiana with Blind Blake, was they laid the seeds of what became rock and roll. Rock and roll is essentially the kind of music that those guys were playing, but just maybe not done as well, and sometimes done as well, but very loud, made really loud and distorted, you know, and that's another type of thing.
I think John McLaughlin tried to emulate the sitar, because in the sitar thing there's no bending, there is no bending.
Right, and because in the sitar, you know, there's just space. It's just physical space, and you have a lot of space. You can get a whole lot of notes out of one position, you know. But a guitar, it doesn't work that way. He had his fretboard scalloped, but I've played what's called scalloped fretboards, where it's kind of dug out so it's a circular shape, and it's not near enough room, no matter how much it's dug out. The only way it would work is if you just didn't even have a fretboard at all. If you had just a bar and some frets across it, then you might could get some of the things like a sitar. But John McLaughlin or Yngwie Malmsteen or others that played with scalloped fretboards, I've looked at those and then played on them. And you can bend them as hard, you can press as hard as you want on there, and you'll never even get, I mean, if you get a half step, you're lucky, but you'll never get more than that. And most of the time, that's if you just about kill yourself with pressure trying to push on it. It's not a good way. It's not a, it makes it too difficult for its own self. But the thing is, now what scalloping is good for is that on wood fretboards, there's a certain amount of what's called drag, drag or friction. So when you hit, the fret is stopping the string and making the note, but your flesh is also touching wood or whatever the fretboard is made of. And if it's scalloped out a little bit, that's of no use really in pitch changing. But it does mean that the flesh doesn't touch the wood, it only touches the string. So therefore the string doesn't touch the wood, and you have less drag. The string just goes across the fret, and it moves very easy for bending this way, up and down. But I kind of prefer the drag. I like the drag of having a fretboard. I've played on scalloped fretboards, and I personally don't like them too much. So I think having the fretboard feels more natural to me.
But of course on the sitar, the whole hand is used to getting the string.
Right.
And more power. Right,
and it's such a different animal, a vastly different creature technically, and how to play and stuff again. So sitar, maybe that was the genesis of what I consider to be somewhat the misidea of McLaughlin, because the guitar to copy the sitar, it's hard. It may be a kind of a fruitless situation. But for guitar to try to sound more like a mandolin, perhaps, or a violin, or maybe a sarangi, or a sarod, or a vina, that's something the guitar has more hope of sounding like. The sitar, for a guitar to sound like sitar, is just too far away. So I think maybe some guitar players make a mistake in that